So I'll cock the shutter, and I've got a cam here that I can use for that purpose. So the shutter's cocked now. If I release it, it's exceptionally reluctant to do anything, but it does fire. The shutter itself appears to be reasonably useful. The stickiness is in these components here. There's a little fleck of something metallic there. Hope that doesn't point to anything serious. Okay, so I might strip down the shutter first. I'll start stripping this shutter down. Oh, that's very tight. That's not, that's loose. That's loose. What a mixture. All this looks a little bit dirty in here, but nothing particularly unusual. That's better. Who's that making noise out there? Now, wriggling this flash arm, well, this arm has a couple of jobs, but one of them is to make the flash contact so that the flash will actually fire. Sometimes it's impossible to get that wriggled out from under there without slackening that screw off and moving that arm. That's better. There's a little plastic insulator on the end here, often loose. It's good in this case. Let's put that back where it came from. Yeah, there's a bit of dirt around here. That's probably dried out grease. That little bracket arm swings around and opens the shutter blades for viewing when you cock the shutter. And 4 screws hold the shutter body to this front plate. That one's a bit scarred. Somebody's screwdriver slipped doing it up by the looks of it. There's 4 screws. Yes, 4 screws came out. Okay, there's a flash contact soldered on here, so I've got to go and unsolder that connection. Then the shutter can come off the front of the front housing. See if I can get this insulating fibre washer off from around the contact now. Without disturbing everything too much. That's good. Here's the shutter itself separated from the front panel. Now on the front panel, while I've got this at this stage, I want to remove the shutter release mechanism here that connects the trigger on the outside of the front housing to the shutter release inside here. And it's just a bit rough in its action, bit dusty and dry probably. See if I can get that disconnected. Yeah, so I just want to clean up this front face, get rid of all that dirt, make sure that's moving smoothly. Likewise, make sure that that plate that it rides on is moving smoothly. Otherwise, probably don't have to do much here. Just checking that the gear here moves very smoothly, and it does. No problems there at all. So I can pop that to one side. Let's have a look at the shutter and shutter housing. Alright, well, I'll remove the front control rings. The front control rings in this shutter are quite stiff. Almost certainly that's down to dried grease in this part. Now that screw was a little bit loose, so was that. So was the third of them. Just pop that to one side. Not much to note there, bit of dirt, nothing too awful. This couples the control rings to the metered drum at the back of the shutter. And that little pinion likewise. Pop those to one side. Let's have a quick look at those front control rings, see if they show any obvious problems. Oh, just a bit greasy looking in there. Nothing bad at all. I expect that lot will clean up fine with a bit of naphtha. Yeah, it all looks good. A bit of corrosion on here, just a few spots, nothing serious. That'll all clean away. Back to this. So what we got? Well, 3 screws hold the shutter itself to this front plate. That's the lens mount, that plate. The screws aren't exactly loose, but they aren't exactly tight either. Here we have the shutter and the front plate side by side. The lens mount has a little pinion gear here. Now that is quite sticky, and certainly that would contribute to those front control rings being stiff. Little ball bearing here that forms the detent for the shutter speeds. Yeah, that's not exactly running smoothly, that little pinion. And just this front cover plate. All those parts will need to be cleaned. Here's the shutter itself, and the shutter itself appeared to work fairly well, so I'd say that this shouldn't create any problems at all for servicing. So remove that retaining clip from the front, the shutter speed settings cam, that little latch which holds the shutter in the cocked position. Is the cocking shaft that runs through from the back of the shutter and cocks it. Here's our internal cocking ring, if you like. And start. I'll remove the retard gear train first, I think, so I'll cock the shutter so that the arm here can swing back out of the way and expose that screw head. There's the retard gear train that can go into some naphtha to soak. This is the self timer or the delay action. Nothing obviously funny about this. As usual, it's got someone's fingerprints embossed in the top. That's entirely normal. Doesn't really cause any problem. Hook that spring, remove the screw. That's a shoulder screw. The spring is free to rotate around the shoulder. That plate off the top, the flash contact, the other arm from the flash mechanism. The shutter release can come out. Now our main spring here, the main drive spring, let's have a look at that. These get tired, they lose their tension over time. And that's not too bad. On these particular shutters, if that spring is too tired, you can often have a shutter that'll work reasonably well at all speeds. It might be a little bit slow at the fast end, but otherwise works reasonably well. But the 15th of a second speed might be off. It's a common common syndrome with this particular type of shutter. Now, it's got to be down to the leverage on the retard gear train, I would say, and the way that selects at the 15th of a second. But what you end up with is when you set a 15th of a second, it can be anywhere between an 1/8 and a 30th. It seems to drift. And it's very annoying, and it's down to lack of tension on this particular spring. And in days of old, that would have been replaced automatically when you CLA'd a synchro-compor shutter. Of course, there haven't been any new parts for a very, very long time, and as a result, if the springs are a little bit tired, they're just going to have to go back and work anyway. If they're very, very tired, I have to hunt through my box of little bit tired springs and find one that's a little bit better. Take these 3 screws from the back of the shutter. That's that little latch lever there that you have to hold back while you change the settings for the self timer or changing the flash sync speed from X to M. Right, so the shutter's looking a little bit more stripped down now. I need to remove this screw so I can remove the B lever, and I need to remove, let's do that first. First we've got to find the right screwdriver. Which is this one here with the slot in the tip, so that it'll go over the post the centre of that screw. The centre of that screw is a post that a spring hooks to. Take that off. The B lever will come off, and now there are two small springs which are very easily lost. One of them is the return spring for the B lever here. I'll put that in a container there and hope not to knock it over. And the other one is the return spring for this lever, which is very good at getting away. And again, it's a very fine spring. And I'd much prefer it if it didn't disappear, because the ones that get away frequently are frequently lost forever, and so over time your potential supply of spares dwindles. Right, these three screws hold the mechanism plate and the shutter case together. Of course, if you're doing this job, you'd be carefully taking note of where all the screws came from, but I'm not going to because I've done it 1,000 times. Well, there's our shutter blades all floating loose now. We've got 6 blades. They'll need cleaning. If the marks on them are reluctant to clean away with naphtha, I have to polish those with a bit of metal polish, Brasso. Yeah. This is the blade actuating ring that I'm swinging backwards and forwards. It's got a pronounced squeak to it, which tells me that it's dry, unlubricated, possibly dust or corrosion. It means that it couldn't possibly be swinging as quick as it should do, and so the shutter speeds were likely not correct. And if there's enough resistance there, of course, the shutter just doesn't function. So that's the blade actuating ring there. There's nothing to see there, that just looks like any old blade actuating ring. It revolves around this piece here on the lens tube, and again there's nothing to see there. That doesn't look particularly dirty or corroded or anything. It looks quite normal, so that is a little bit of a mystery, but I'm sure it'll be running smoothly when I'm done. Now the shutter case, there's no diaphragm blades in the shutter case. A case like this you would normally expect shutter blades here and the diaphragm blades behind it. There's nothing there. Oh yeah, I don't normally bother to lift this plate because there's nothing underneath it, but the screw's loose. Now they're all loose. Now there's a real problem with those screws. If they come loose, the heads rise up, of course, and the heads can interfere with the shutter blades and stop the shutter from functioning. It might stop the shutter blades from opening, or it might stop the shutter blades from returning, depending on where it happened to be. So I will be cleaning these components and putting them back together, and I'll make sure those screws are done up tight. Zoom me out a bit. That's the shutter there in a state of disrepair, and now I've got to clean everything and put it back together.